Isn't that a great tune? Welcome to 2025. Happy New Year to all my listeners. The music you just heard represents a new phase of the Culture Compute podcast in 2025. This year, we are embracing new ideas, deeper conversations, and perspectives at the intersection of culture, technology, and education. And to set the tone, I used AI to create this intro song, blending human creativity with machine intelligence, a fusion that mirrors the evolving landscape of how we learn, teach, and innovate. Technology is not just a tool, it is a cultural force, shaping the way we think, connect, and create. As we stand at the dawn of another year, we must ask, how do we, as educators, researchers, and lifelong learners, harness AI and digital advancements to not only enhance learning but also preserve the richness of human wisdom and experience? Recently, I had the opportunity to talk with Professor Dwayne Wood from National University about the potential of AI and its implications for learning. Let's dive into that conversation now. Today's episode is a fascinating deep dive into generative AI, a technology that is revolutionizing how we approach instructional design and curriculum development and the student experience, not only from higher ed but also in K 12 settings. AI is no longer a buzzword, it is reshaping education as we know it. And today's discussion will help us unpack its profound impacts and ethical considerations. My guest today is Dr. Dwayne Wood, an associate professor.
Yeah, associate professor at National University, specifically in learning experience and educational technology.
Oh, that's really nice. Yeah. Okay. And you also bring a wealth of experience to this conversation, blending your unique background mainly in military service, which is unbelievable. And thank you for your service. And also, you converge that with your passion for education and leadership and instructional design. You have dedicated your career to creating authentic, learner centered experiences that connect theory to practice. And your philosophy is empowering students to achieve their full potential. Dr. Wood, you're particularly focused on generative AI's role in transforming academic nature and curricula, and you also try to understand how these multimodal technologies are used to support learners from all over, all backgrounds, and understanding adult learning principles to enhance educational and instructional effectiveness, and so much more. Dr. Wood, it is an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. I always love these opportunities to talk. I like to say, yes, we're going to talk about all this stuff I was going through, but I learn as we do this. As we go through this, I learn things. It's always a great opportunity. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. I agree with you when you say that when you discuss with other scholars and when common minds converge, new ideas just arise. I like that. It's like that statement. Um, I believe Newton said that in a letter, standing on the shoulders of the giants.
Giants.
Isn't
Yep.
that amazing? That is, I feel
Yes.
right now. So, absolutely, I'm really thrilled to jump into this conversation with you because of the landscape of this education is changing so fast. And it's changing because this new general purpose technology, think of this as electricity. It's at the center of this transformation. It's called generative AI. Everywhere there is electricity, there is generative AI now. It's unbelievable. Compare this with 5 years ago. Before we begin, I wanted to share a little bit about you to our audience. Please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Dr. Wood holds an EDD, which is a PhD, but in educational contexts, and you specialize in leadership and management. You have received that from Capella University. Previously, you served in the U.S. Army in various capacities, including roles that were both mission related and also instructional technology focused. Your experience as a military science instructor and instructional designer has clearly shaped your unique perspective on leadership and education. And I also want to again thank you for your service. Additionally, National University has two locations, from my understanding, San Diego and La Mesa.
So they also have a very large online, completely distance edge education footprint, and that's really where I support. So I don't do any of the brick and mortar classes, but I'll support in the it's a program called the Masters of Science in Instructional Design and Educational Technology, and really what I like about that program is it focuses for the practitioner, the practical aspects of integrating technology into learning experiences, because it's super important. If it's not integrated like in the strategic sense, when you're looking at how you're designing a course, it's going to feel like an add-on or an afterthought, and it's not going to achieve those outcomes that you thought it was going to have. So that's why it's really important to look at it from the beginning of your instructional design at the strategic level as you build in your learning experiences.
True, true. So I'm assuming you have these in-service folks taking your courses, and they are already teaching, I believe, but they are more traditional in their approach, huh?
Yeah. So really, when we talk about individuals that take this program, most of them are already in the they're in the K through 12 environment. They're active teachers. They're pursuing their master's degree for continuing education and meet credential requirements. So but we also get a mix. Well, I get folks that are in the learning and development sector. So that's our corporate training, right? That's kind of what we call it, learning and development. But I also get folks from the military. I've gotten people from educational sales and technology in the course. So there's been a wide range, but mostly that K through 12. And what's fascinating, what I find so fascinating working with some of these K through 12 teachers is we'll introduce generative AI, and we'll talk, we're starting to talk about it, and then they'll use it, and then they'll go, I think my students are using this. Right. It's kind of like, oh yeah, they probably are, right? And then they start to explore it more, right? And they start to get this sense. That's kind of the beauty there. And um, some of these are fantastic teachers, because then they start thinking automatically, how am I going to use this to help my students? And when I hear that, it's like, that's what we're trying to do, right? The ultimate goal whenever we look at something is, how is this improving student learning, right? That we should be able to answer that question. If we can't, then maybe we shouldn't be doing that, right? And I always like to say, a lot of times in education, less is more, right? The simpler it is, and how it's laid out and how it's presented, the better the learning outcome you're probably going to get.
That's true. I agree. Basically, you're also, in one way, imparting a new skill, AI literacy, to these students. And they are, in turn, going to open up the tap of that AI literacy onto their young learners. So you're passing of skill to your students, and then they doing that step two has a huge impact. I just wanted to acknowledge that first. You see,
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And actually, when we thought about this, or when we approached this course or this program, that's exactly what we had in mind, right? How do we do this? And we took a very experiential learning approach. So I'm not providing you a bunch of stuff up front. I'm getting out of the knowledge transmission game, and I'm moving more to like that coach mentor. I actually tell my students, think of me as your peer mentor. As we go through this program. I'm here to get you through this process and think about it. And when we just have them experiment with it and then reflect on it on their current practice, and that seemed to work the best in this. We always try to transit this gap between theory and practice, right? I could teach you theory all day long, but it doesn't really mean anything unless you can put it in practice. So that's a skill in itself. So that's one of the outcomes we try to achieve is, can we talk about constructionist theory? And then how that would be practiced, in the classroom. And that's where it matters. And that's, again, I tell my students right up front, if during this course and during this, as we're going through this learning together, if you can't tell me how you're directly going to apply this to your own practice, I'm wasting your time. Mm-hmm. Right? That's what matters. And if you talk about adult learning, that's going to produce motivation. Think about it as you're a professional educator, and then you're told, look, I'm here to help you improve your practice, right? Tell me about your stuff, and let's have this conversation and go. This is proves that motivation is just going to, to complete the course and work through it and get the most out of it. Right. So I think that's important. Instead of just, checking the box, especially in the asynchronous online environment. It's very easy to go, okay, yep, I gotta do a discussion. Okay, discussion. Yeah, I agree with you. This is great. There's no learning that happens there, or it's not the intended learning, right? So that's what I think we have to get beyond that. Like in the course that we talked about and the paper was written on, we actually used the discussion forum in a different way. We used it as, if you can think about, like in chemistry class, you would do a lab. That's what we did with the discussion forum. So, it might be the first thing we're talking about instructional design. We usually talk about like gap analysis or need analysis, right? Where are the gaps in education or knowledge and skills that I need to fill, right? So you have to do some analysis to figure that out. Well, what we do is we had students have Gen AI help them determine where gaps were. And then what they did is that was their lab. So they had to submit their results, and then they got to have some social aspects of, oh, that's a great idea. I should try. Right. And then they had that got much better results than the traditional discussion question. Right. We had people doing more than the minimum required responses. There was a lot of great things that came out of there. There was things that I learned from the students about, oh, I could use it to do this. I could use it to do this. Right. Then we start having the question, well, how? Right now, you got to start, really getting into the nitty gritty. So that's and the results afterwards. Interviewing students and talking with them about that experience, they said, that those labs, that discussion forum, they thought they got the most out of it than the other activities in the course, which I thought was pretty powerful, because you ask somebody else in another asynchronous online course, they're going to say the discussion questions are probably more of a hindrance, right? That's something they got to do by Wednesday afternoon, right? And you don't get much out of it. Especially think about the adult learner, especially in the context we're talking about, right? They're teaching all day long. Then they come home, take care of the family, and then they can probably sit down and actually start maybe digesting some education. That's hard, right? So we got to be there and provide that. They got to know what they're doing is going to be important, and it's going to improve their practice of what they do in their life. So that's kind of an approach we took in that. And again, I think it's a good approach. It's based upon, again, I got a pretty small sample size, so far. We've ran the course a few times. It's getting more numbers, but the results have been pretty consistent.
Good on that. I mean, good luck with your new approach of using AI to critically evaluate something rather than just use the discussion board as a checklist. Because you put me on the spot there, because I am going to teach this course in winter, which is fully asynchronous, and college students take college writing course. I'm going to use a discussion board, and I'm going to utilize your technique, to see how these students respond. And I highly encourage students to use AI. While there are many other instructors at UMass, for example, who prohibit use of AI in their classes for various plagiarism and cheating sort of purposes. But
And
mm,
and I can understand that, right? There's kind of two sides when we look at this. There are pitfalls. There are kind of some things that we need to be aware of when we're using this. But the number one thing that I found is transparency. If you're talking to the students and they know and they understand, you understand, and you're having that conversation back and forth, that's only going to improve things. But the other thing I like to have students understand is that one, you talked about information literacy or AI literacy. That's critical, and if you got to integrate that right as part of it, because even in normal research outside of using AI, we have to be aware of confirmation bias, right? I'm only finding the resources to support my position. Well, that can take you down the wrong path, right? You need to look for other things that counter your position, right? To see if there's anything out there. Well, one of the drawbacks of this generative AI is that it's always going to side with you. It's always going to give you the answer you want, right? So even we could talk about bias in the training data sets that exist, but there's also an automatic confirmation bias depending on how you design your prompts or what you ask it. It's going to tell you what you want. So it's only going to confirm your position. So we have to always be aware of that when we're asking it for things like that. So now I may ask it then and be like, okay, now tell me how I would verify this, right? Where do I go to find information? That second part of that AI or information literacy. And the skills are so important now. In my day when we were doing research, we had to go to the card catalog, right? Open up the little drawer, find it, go in the shelf, Dewey Decimal System, go to the periodical rack, right? And microfiche, right? That type of stuff. And so you really didn't have to do a lot of validation of sources because there was not a lot,
mm,
and they were pretty reputable, right? Now it's like infinite information at your fingertips, but not
mm,
all of it's good. So there's a new skill set of information literacy. And these training data sets are coming from the internet, right? So we have that's a skill that we have to develop. We're not just accepting whatever it says. We need to be, healthy skepticism, right? I like to tell my students, I used to use this method when I was in the service, is the 5 whys, right? So if I say something, well, why is that? Okay, and then I find that, oh, why is that? Right? And you'll get down to the root problem there instead of just addressing a symptom.
interesting. That's really interesting. Also, now that you said this five eyes, it's also a validation sort of a validation metric that the learners can use to validate the factualness and any biases that are definitely there already because it's in the dataset that they use to train the models. So figuring out if something is real or not is a real critical phase of any, not only educational in its output, but it can be anything. It can work related. How do you know if it's real? That's really great points you're making there, Dr. Wood.
Well, I was going to add, we have to be aware. What I like to, we talk about metacognition, right? So, how, I understand my own thinking, and self awareness is a big part of this. Because if you think about when you're interacting with an AI, if it's something outside your domain knowledge, how do you be skeptical of that now? Because it's maybe a little bit outside. So there's another skill set. This is part of the reason why I'm a firm believer that we think about, like, well, with AI we don't need teachers anymore. I think that's false. We're always going to need somebody to be. Now, does the role change? I think so. Less and less knowledge transmission, and more of that we start shifting, I think, to that coach mentor type role. When we're talking about that, that's where I think, maybe the Socratic method becomes even more valuable, right? When we get to there. So I think there's an evolution here. Excuse me. What I think is hard here is that evolution is going to take more time than the technology advances.
Right, that's true. I agree with you because it's going so fast, and we are still stuck with just experimenting with ChatGPT 4. There's so many papers that are coming out This people are still using ChatGPT 4, while 2025 people are already calling it the agentic era. They're going to be agents apparently,
Yeah.
and so it's a whole new world that we are about to enter into, and we are. Um, it's a speechless moment. As educators, we need to be really focused at the very core of this and see what are the open challenges we are being thrown at us. I agree with you. I just wanted to just uh, deviate just a little bit towards like a much bigger picture, in the sense that I see K-12 teachers and many of the higher education instructors, especially at UMass, are slowly realizing the mistakes they have made a couple of years ago, when we saw that most students were using AI to answer their essays, write papers, and but now they've realized the potential that, hey, maybe I should not prohibit the use of AI, but maybe I should have my students embrace it, embrace this tool in learning and teaching. And what do you think are some academic approaches in teaching and learning that are still, not being addressed in this context?
That's a really, I mean, it seems like a simple question, but that's a really complex question. Because, if you ask me, I asked that, I was like, well, it depends. And here's why I say that is because what we're doing now, so if you look at what we're doing now, it has a certain set of learning outcomes, right? And one of that might be, become more, I'm just throwing it out there, but along the lines of being more proficient in academic writing might be an outcome. Well, in the age of Gen AI, is writing a priority skill anymore? Right. So it comes down to what outcomes do we want to achieve? I try to equate this. This is not a great analogy, but I've heard it before, and it kind of makes sense to me. Is the pocket calculator when it came out. So when we talk about this in our society today, how many of our students today can do mental math?
Mhm.
Right? It's less and less, probably, I would imagine, because they got a support, right? It doesn't replace thinking, but it augments thinking. And to me, that makes the same thing to how we have to approach this technology. Again, this technology, I think, is more encompassing, right? It's a much wider, broader than, say, that pocket calculator. But I think it's the same way. When you look at how it's being used, can you say, this is augmenting my thinking or it's replacing my thinking?
Mhm.
And that's where the difference is, because in education, right, we need the cognitive effort, right, to learn. So, one of the things that I'm exploring when we talk about, you said, how do we approach this, from an academic stem, is there's this term called a cognitive forcing function.
Mhm.
And so if you think about it in our daily work lives, we use these all the time. We just don't think about it, right? So if I have a task or something I'm doing at work and I use a checklist, that checklist is a cognitive forcing function, right? It forces me to think about, the steps that I'm taking, or, so on and so forth. So in our academic, I think we need to do the same thing. So when we talk about it, and what this gets down to is the product is not as important as the process now.
Mhm.
So, in our traditional academic, how do we evaluate if a student is met a learning outcome? Well, we evaluate the product that they produce, right, based upon a rubric or set of standards, so on and so forth. Well, with Gen AI, it's producing a product, so the product's not as important. What's important now is the thinking that went behind producing that product. So when we talk about a traditional assessment is an essay, right? Almost everybody, I mean, that's probably the most widely used assessment. Well, now it has to be, okay, maybe ask Gen AI if it can help you with this essay, see what it comes up with, and then provide how you evaluated the content.
Mhm.
Now it's a cognitive forcing function. It's like a checklist. I'm asking you to do this task. And then you have to provide your evaluation of that content. Now I'm getting beyond just knowledge transmission, and I'm getting knowledge evaluation. I'm much higher on the Bloom's cognitive scale. right? As I'm going. So that's what I mean when we have to really start thinking about, yes, if we're going to use a traditional essay as an assessment and we're going to allow students to use Gen AI, we need to make sure that we're still getting the same or better cognitive effort, because that's what matters in learning. Again, our sole goal is student learning, right? So if they just use Gen AI, they turn it in and they get a grade, no learning happened. Well, learning happened, not the intended learning, right? They learned that they could get a grade by just clicking a couple buttons. So that's what I mean about it depends. Honestly, you have to look at the specifics of that. What are you trying to achieve? What's the audience, right? One of the things that in the course that I teach that uses Gen AI as an instructional tool, the first thing I look at is what's my previous experience of Gen AI with my audience? Because if they have none, I got to work with that.
Mm.
Right? So, and I got to be able to provide some scaffolding, some supports. A lot of my students that come into that course are afraid, and they have this fear because of what they've seen in the media. Right? Hey, this thing it's cheating. It's all. So I think we have to really think about that. And here's what kind of my stance on cheating. If this tool is going to be available in the workplace to accomplish tasks, why is it cheating? Because what's the goal of education? I'm preparing you for the workforce or for life. Well, if that task is going to, if that tool is going to be available, you should be learning how to use it. In the instructional design, I tell my students, look, if you'd asked me a year ago, I would have said like, this is kind of like, no one's really using this right now, right? But now it's almost normalized. Like you said in the beginning, it become normalized. It's normal to use this. So if I'm not helping you understand it and how to use it in this instructional design context, I'm setting you up for failure when you go out to the job market. Right. So that's my thought on it. And that gets down to my, one of my core educational beliefs is that we have to make it as authentic as possible. And I take that from my military experience in the idea that we train as we fight. Right. It's the same way. We have to make it as authentic as possible, because this idea of transfer of learning, right? If I attend your course and I get all this great stuff, but I can't transfer it to my real life or to my work, right? Then we haven't achieved what we're trying to get to. So we have to learn how to close that gap. We're never going to completely close it, but we can close it. I can make assessments as authentic. Like, one of the things that the students have to do in instructional design is they have to actually develop a learning plan for a specific learning outcome, right? They're going to do that in their classroom. Right. I have them do target audience analysis using learner personas. It's something they haven't probably done, but when they do it, they're like, oh, I learned so much about my, a subgroup of my audience. Now I understand maybe a little bit how I need to change what I do in the classroom. Right. So it's that just level of analysis and awareness. That was a really long-winded response for your question. I'm sorry. Did I get it?
No, I think you addressed many points there because the way many people right now assess their classes, assignments, or whatever is very traditional in their approach. But you never necessarily observe if the learners have really gained the skills. And especially with this Gen AI, an essay is only a prompt away. And there are tools out there that will also do references for you, which is even more weird. And so, how do you know what the learners are really learning and how can they really transfer that to a next course or to the next phase of their life? I don't want this to be like a blank hop. This every hop has to give you a little more spring action. So you really go forward with feeling confident and then you are able to achieve. You have the agency. I would like that to happen really. And I think that might also be like a great call for people in the assessments field, psychometrics, and all sorts of educational assessments to I believe they're working on it to change the the way which is very medieval, which is happening since ages, the same structure, but with this AI, you need to totally change that. You have to not just assess the product, But how do you assess the process?
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
what you said earlier.
That's exactly it. And it's, one of the ways that I did it. Again, there's some learning and some tweaking and some things I need to do is, we think about, I broke what's the end task, and I broke it down into steps, and then we had steps within those steps, right? So then you're actually seeing the process, right, and what's happening, the thinking that's happening, and I like to use reflection. Again, I'm a huge fan of reflection, just because there's a saying. Who said it? I think Edmund Burke or somebody said it. They said, reading without reflection is like eating without digestion. So I just replace reading with experience. Experience without reflection is like eating without digestion. So it's the same way. Like, so if I ask you to do a task analysis, right? And again, you can use Gen AI, but then I ask you to reflect on it. How'd that process go? How do you feel it? How do you feel that met? Does that feel right based upon what you know about the audience? Where all this kind of reflection that'll happen. And again, we're getting to that metacognition. I'm starting to better understand my own thinking, and you need that to identify bias, right? We all have some kind of bias, right? And we have to be aware of that. And that's that metacognition, as we go through. That's why I think we talked about initially, like, skills, right? Well, maybe writing skill becomes less of a priority, but things like critical thinking, creative thinking, cultural understanding is much more important now. Information literacy, I think, is number one, right? But that kind of could fall in our critical thinking umbrella. But those become more important. So now we maybe need to orient our learning outcomes towards those
Hmm.
instead of just, say, academic writing.
That's true. Yeah, exactly. I there are many things that can be extracted from those sentences. Thank you, Dr. Hood. Moving on, from a instructional design perspective, you know, we are always trying to create content that is not just any generic content, but something that is effective and optimal, and people from all backgrounds should be able to extract the meaning, the essence of the topic. So, in that way, from a generative AI technology, there is a text to image and text to video. There are all sorts of cool stuff happening. So they call this multimodal models. And do you have you used any of these in your own work?
Yeah, I have, and they're getting better and better, right? But initially they weren't that great. Especially some of the images, right? When you're doing it, though I'll give you an example. I shared this, actually, one of my students. We sat down and they had a problem they want to solve, and they wanted to use technology to help them solve it. They were a third grade visual arts teacher, right? And I was like, well, how can we use technology? So one of the things I said, in our environments and learning, if you can combine things, right, in learning, you can get better outcomes. So I was like, what if we did something with, again, a free text to image one at that time that we were using was Stable Diffusion, because it was completely free, right? You could just pull it up and do it. So I was like, what if you developed a, like, Mad Lib for, like, a short paragraph, and then you had students go in and go, okay, we need a noun. What's a noun, everybody? Right? So now we're adding English language, right? Oh, we need a verb, right? And we put that in, and then we take that Mad Lib and we put it into Stable Diffusion and see what image it produces. Then we could say, okay, we're really looking at Picasso, so let's ask the system to put this in the style of Picasso, right? And then we could do that, and we could show them, and then we could go, okay, think about what we just did, and now I want you to do in the style of Picasso XYZ, right? So I was waiting for the student to come back and say, I tried that, it worked great, or it didn't work. Here's some things I learned. I haven't got that yet, so I don't have, like, some data to say, yeah, I think it worked. But in my mind and in my experience, I think that would engage students. It'd be
Mm.
using the technology, and we'd get kind of the English and combining the visual arts, and we would get that idea. Again, they're getting better. Some of the video stuff that's coming out, text to video stuff, that's going to be pretty powerful. And the reason I say that is, so in an instructional design, in pretty much each sector, or where you're working, you always are working with a time. And the longest development stuff is always those media elements. So if I want a video as part of my design, which videos are great, long as you keep them short, you're going to, you tend to absorb the information better. We could talk about cognitive load theory and how that applies. And, a picture's worth 1,000 words. It actually is, right? Because of the intrinsic load. But, those take a long time sometimes to produce, and they take some special skills, right? Some additional knowledge and training and all that stuff that goes along to produce that. So it can be expensive. But with these technologies now, if I need a good short instructional video for something, maybe I just plug it in and it produces it, right? And then I upload it and it works. So I can definitely see efficiencies there, that those efficiencies will actually produce better learning outcomes, because now I can produce that resource that I maybe couldn't produce before.
That's true.
And then you kind of hinted at, we were talking about, some of these other resources on the students' end, though. They can do summaries. You can put something, you're studying a document or something you have in there. You can ask it questions, right? You can have it ask you questions, which is a great way to kind of learn content, right? So you can have this kind of one back and forth with it. Like, one of the things I like to do with the prompts when I do one is I'll say the last sentence I'll put ask me questions before responding, because then it'll give me a list of questions, and then I'll answer those, and I get a much better product.
Yeah.
So I think that's some ways, right, that it could be used. Again, keep being aware of all the other ethical, responsible things that are in there, right? If the document that I'm trying to study or use is copyrighted, and I upload it to an AI system, I may be now in violation of copyright, because that data is going to go into the system, right? So we have to be careful, when we talk about copyright, fair use and that type of stuff.
That's true. I've also seen people take photos and upload it to Stable Diffusion or even Dolly, the latest ones, and then you can crop in as if you are showing something on a blackboard behind you, and you're explaining something. You can modify images now. Uh, in that same line, I'm actually really looking forward towards the actual educational pedagogical agents that I believe have more personalized approaches that they can deliver to these learners. Think of these as actual realistic looking animated people, but they know what you're doing inside your canvas or your LMS. And based on what you do, they're providing you instant feedback, something like that, like what Conmigo does, but it's more chat based.
Yeah.
But looking at the PEDA agents is something that I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah. The one thing I'm a little leery about that, is I think it does start to lead us towards this idea that you don't need a human teacher. And the reason I say that is learning is more than just the cognitive function. There's social, emotional, all that stuff is you need all that to produce the learning outcome. So if we're just working with a bot, I think we have to be careful that that's not only what it is. And again, it comes down to that answer of it depends. What's the context? How are we using it? I think it would be, we have this methodology called the flipped classroom, right? The idea that I'm going to send students home with a video to watch. It's the content. And then when they come to class, I can work with them because I'm an expert in the room. Where, the old traditional method is, I'm going to cover all this stuff in the classroom. I'm going to send you with homework, and your parents don't know how to do it. So you become frustrated and you don't do it right. So this flipped idea was the way to overcome. Well, what if the flip methods now is you work with that bot for a certain period of time in the afternoon, and you get those advantages, and then we come back in the classroom, and I, as a teacher, I can apply those more social, emotional aspects, and round out that cognitive function. So that's what I think is I don't necessarily call it a fear, maybe a concern, is that we're going down the line of just cognitive function when we need more than that. We need the
Yeah.
social aspects. We need the emotional aspects. All that is part of just being good mental health, actually, right? In the long run. So I think that, excuse me, I think that's a concern there for me, is if it gets overused.
Mm.
It's the same way with just generative AI. A concern for me there is if it starts to replace your critical thinking skills, well, that's an over reliance on it now. Now you need it, right? And so to me, that's a concern there. And how do we mitigate that, right? And again, augment learning, not replace.
Metacognitive laziness. I'm seeing it. If you over rely it, overuse it, and it's all over you, you're only a click away to do the thing. And if you keep doing this, all your laborious tasks, which until now helped you see things around your environment and your peers next to you, you touch them and you talk to them, you exchange smiles, and now all of that is just a click away with a simple prompt. And that also diminishes this metacognitive labor. It's uh, disfluency. It's going to degrade. I really hate to see that happen, but it might
It,
happen.
well, think about right now with social media, the internet and social media. Has
Mm.
that already started to degrade some of our social and emotional skills? I mean, that's probably a debatable question, right? We need a bunch of data to support it and everything. But are we going down that same line with this technology? So that's a concern for me. And how do we mitigate that? In my mind, the mitigation is that becomes the critical aspect for the teacher in the room.
Mm.
Again, the role kind of shifts a little bit. Less cognitive knowledge transmission. Again, more of that coach, mentor, that role model, right? And so to me, that's what I think and to give you an analogy in the military, and I've seen this when I was in the service, is land navigation, right? So when I was in the service, basic land nav was a map and a compass, right? And there's a certain skill set that there, right? When you're doing that, well, GPS technology came out. So basic land nav became, well, how do you work the GPS?
Mm.
Well, the skill for map and compass eroded, but we still need it. But we didn't realize it eroded until too late. So we had to go back and how do we train this? Because there's some additional um, things that you get when you learn how to use a map and a compass, and it's problem solving skills, right? I have a known and unknown. How do I figure that out, right? And there's some basic problem solving skills that you can encourage when developing that skill. And that's what I mean when we kind of talked about, that's another example of, we talked about, the process over product, but also this focusing more on some of those intangible things like critical thinking, creative thinking, versus that tangible product.
That's true. I just wanted to add a little bit of interjection there for the social media. I think, in 2000s, early 2000s, when Facebook launched, everybody flocked to it because it said that you can connect with your friends and families. I loved it. We all are there. But after a decade, after 2 decades, you see the long-term consequences of all these, especially young girls, females, uh, experiencing suicidal thoughts and high depression rates and anxiety disorders and stuff like that, which is really, I'm seeing that also be scaled to this AI tools, especially when it comes to our way of processing information now and in a decade from now will be completely worlds apart.
Yeah, there's a social theory. It's an older theory, and I wish I could tell you the name of it, but it was someone had looked at it like through an international policy lens, and the idea was, how are non-Americans viewing Americans? How do they come up with their opinions? And
Oh,
it's through TV. How wrong do you think an opinion of the average American is by watching TV sitcoms is? Right. So it's the same kind of way when you talk about social media. I'm starting to form my reality through these really like small snippets of information, and it's forming a certain pattern, and that's becoming my reality. Right. So that's what we have to be, we have to know a wider perspectives, which that gets down to critical thinking, right? Understanding multiple perspectives. You know, in the same kind of thought here, when we talk about AI, is I I I think there's a little concern there for thinking of it as a human,
Mm.
because then we start attributing things to it, like, I can trust it. Don't trust it, right? Because even, in some things it does really great, right? And you could probably have a little bit higher level of trust, but still be skeptical. And then other things it doesn't do so great. So you want to make sure that, but if you don't have that domain knowledge, or if you don't have that critical thinking skills, you're going to accept it if you've already established that you have trust with it.
Mm.
So that's what I mean about this, that social emotional, right? That's part of this thinking process. It's not just the cognitive function. And I think we're probably a ways off before a bot starts to understand human emotion.
Moving on to another main topic, a lot of people are also worried about this ethical and responsible ways of using these huge computing math machines that can do anything you want. But at the same time, these machines are built using stolen material from the internet. It's debatable if it's stolen, how you see it, but they went to New York Times and then scraped all the material, even things that are behind a paywall. But from this potential of AI that we see, the conversation will never stop when we talk about these ethical implications. You see, I also like this term when you said transparency. It's all about transparency. And as AI becomes more integrated into our instructional design and content creation in whatever capacity, these questions about transparency, accountability, uh, in the sense that do you own the essay you just asked it to make, or who owns it? Stuff like that. And also equity, which is the idea that everybody should be able to access AI, irrespective of if you are from a low income slash low internet or no internet schools. There are people all over, right? And this topics of ethical becomes very increasingly critical. So, from a general perspective, what are some key ethical challenges you think we need to address when using AI in education contexts?
Yeah, I think you hit on. I mean, you hit on the big ones, right? All the big ones that are out there. One is the idea of plagiarism, right? Because if I have the system generate something for me, how do I know it's not just pulling from another source that I don't cite, right? So that again, that comes down to information literacy, right? I need to still do the work, to understand the topic, so that I can understand what the system's kind of producing, as we go through it. Bias to me is a big one. Depending on what system you're using and the training database, there's gonna be bias in there, especially against if we talk about like different cultures and gender and because it's reading off the internet, right? Most of these things are pulling data from the internet, so we have to be very, very careful and make sure that we're the bias that we're looking at and when we go to use. You talked about attribution, right? I'm a believer that if I produce something, you have to take full accountability of it. Even if you had a bot produce it, you're saying I'm accountable for whatever's in that document. So if it's plagiarized, it's plagiarized. Now, in an academic context, there, I like to use those as teaching moments versus, just like, slapping all the policy, the like,
Right.
okay, let's have a discussion. And that's part of that transparency, because then we can look at it and be like, okay, look, this is how I found that this came from a source and it's not cited. I just did a Google search and it came up with this document, and look, it's word for word, right? So we have that conversation. Right now, it's a teaching moment, and we can have that conversation, and we can learn something from that versus getting that negative consequence right away. And I think at least I know most of my colleagues do the same thing. Even before Gen AI, they used to do that, right? That was kind of a normal practice, right? Because it is a teaching moment, and you can use it. You brought up the idea of this digital divide, and I think that is a less talked about concern because we already have a digital divide without Gen AI.
Right.
And if right now it's free, so if you still have an internet access, right, but some people don't, right, or they don't have one that's robust enough to use that system. So that still, but if we start charging, right, it becomes not like open to everybody, but only those that can pay for it. We're widening that digital divide. So that's a concern, right? And you know, in instructional design, I have this conversation with, you know, all my instructional designers and students all the time, is that this is another reason to understand your audience. You know, if you produce this great video, it's in HD, you know, and you put it on your site, well, can your audience watch it from their home internet? If they can't, don't do it in HD. Do a much lower resolution video, because then they'll be able to access it. Because they can't access it, they're getting nothing out of it, right?
Right.
So we have to know, that's, you know, when I have them do learner personas, it's right. What are the challenges, barriers, right? The thing that this subset of your audience would encounter, and then you can think about, oh, how do I mitigate that?
Mhm.
And we can talk about, you know, there's universal design for learning is out there, you know, and it's got some great practices to follow. You know, if you got a video, have a transcript, have a written document, right, that you can choose with one. And you know, a lot of times we talk about accessibility in this also, which AI can help, right? There's some things that, you know, accessibility that can help. Um, you know, I get the question like, well, why are we doing all this extra stuff? Well, one, it's the law, right? You need to, but second, if you design to an accessible standard, it helps everybody. Like, well, can you give me an example of that? Well, think about the adult learner that commutes on a subway train, and you have a video that they have to watch, and it doesn't have captioning.
Oh.
Well, if they turn captioning on, they can get the content and watch the video on the subway train,
Mm.
right? So again, if accessibility matters, and if you do it to the accessibility standards, you're helping everybody, not just those that need it.
That's true. I agree with you. Also, when you do have a paid tier, does that mean that people who don't pay get lower quality
Yeah.
videos up? So there's that divide also, which is
Mm-hmm.
more driven by the capitalistic mind because you're trying to convert everybody to like a paid customer.
Yeah.
At
And
this,
oh yeah, so you know, you sparked this kind of idea in my mind. I think about it, right? We think about education as an inherent right. Is that right? Education is an inherent right. Well, what if technology now becomes inherent to education? Is technology access now an inherent right? That might be up for debate. Now, as an educator, I know what my answer would be, right? But I'm biased.
right.
So, yeah, you know, so and I understand, like in our education institutions, especially K through 12, they're resource constrained, right? I mean, teachers come up with some fantastic techniques, things that they use, just super creative things, because they don't have the financial resources, right? That, you know, they can lean on, you know, and honestly, I don't know if we compensate them enough for that level of, you know, the level of effort that sometimes that they're putting in, you know.
I also wanted to say that the entire field is going on this train track of, let's just call it cloud AI, because ChatGPT ultimately is like a online or cloud or whatever you call it. There is also on device AI,
Mm-hmm.
which is the idea that these folks have open sourced the weights of the models in ways that you can download the entirety of the internet. Sounds huge, but it's not. It's about 5 to 10 gigs of a file, and it sits on your computer. And there are wrappers, there are little apps out there, and you can ask it anything you want without internet. So I see huge potential there, actually, especially
Yep.
when you go to rural India, where I'm from,
Mm-hmm.
or go to rural any place where there is they have not heard of AI. You and me are fortunate enough to work in universities, huge universities with large funding, and so we know this mainstream technology. But what about these young, much younger kids who need to be playing with this. The first time when the computers came, long time ago, 20 years ago, we were both kids in our teenage, whatever. And when we saw the first time, we were hooked to the screens. We never moved. And these kids are missing that, is what I'm trying to say here. And so having like a on device offline models has, I think, some huge potential, especially addressing at least this bridging of global south
Yeah.
and global north, sort of a United Nations terminology they use. We can discuss that in another episode, but I really want to take that up also. This is also something that anyone anywhere in the world can use without internet, which means no data. They don't need to pay for data. And number two is none of your data goes to the cloud. It's all on device,
Yep.
which is very privacy.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a privacy nut, you will love it. So I like that also. And that is really great. Also, there are some terrifying consequences apparently, because you can just ask it to make a bomb.
Yeah, that's some other aspects, and then you could go down this whole debate too, like, well, we're going to put guardrails, right? We're going to put some guardrail. Well, now is there a free speech infringement? So I mean, we could go. I mean, again, I think it comes down to that we really need to so right now there's no standardization. There's no real and it's so new, right? We're talking what ChatGPT came out, what, 23, November of
Right.
23 or somewhere around there. We're like a year down the road, and we're trying to, so we don't even know yet, right? Kind of some of these longer term impacts,
Mhm.
you know. So that's one of the first things. Like if I go anywhere, it's like, well, what's your AI policy, right? Some places don't. Even saying you can't use it, that's a policy. That's better than no policy, right? That's important, and it's got to be pretty specific, at least in my mind. And sometimes new professors that they want to integrate this technology into their course sometimes lack the ability to differentiate and talk with their students about levels of use. There's a thing called the AI scale out there that helps you with that. It goes from like no use to full use, and then it's broken down, and it actually gives details about, okay, so you can say, hey students, on this assignment you're going to be at level 3 on the AI scale for use. Right. So now you're being very specific about how the student will actually use this technology for that specific task. It's just a way to help communicate and help that transparency.
That's true. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I also have heard of Lance Eaton, like a popular education technology experimental person on LinkedIn who posts about what are other instructors around the world and what are they teaching and what are their unique AI policy syllabus statements. So he's maintaining that huge document. Maybe I can send you the link. I'll also put
Yeah,
that in the show
please.
notes. My own advisor, Tori Trust, who's, by the way, named top 30 ed tech innovators to follow in 2024, also has made a AI scale sort of a AI
Yep.
syllabus policy statement, which I think is very close to what you're saying. That's really
Yes.
interesting to uh, provide our learners with a rubric, a rough rubric as to, hey, don't do this, but do it this way.
Yeah, it definitely it's a big help. In the paper the last paper that I wrote, we had we called it the AI ICE model. Um, that was trying to get to something like that, but more it was like how it was to help us frame the cognitive effort that a student was putting in when collaborating on a product with AI. Right. It needs some work. It's pretty general. It's pretty so. That's one of the things I'm looking at is how do we do that, and integrate that with a cognitive forcing function. Can I show that a specific cognitive forcing function has a greater impact on critical thinking when interacting with Gen AI?
Mm.
That I mean, this is things we don't know yet, right? And that's some advice I always give educators in this realm. Um, share, because there's somebody probably out there that knows how to do it. It's worked for them, right? They've done something, they've worked. But if you need to, we could share it so we can all learn from it. That's the sole purpose I published that paper, was to try to, hey, this is what we did, this is what worked, this is what didn't work, and this is what we think we're going to try in the future, right? Really taking that iterative approach.
Yeah, it's important to share in your networks so others learn from it and then don't repeat that mistake. That's the purpose of all these professional learning communities.
Yep.
And what exactly is what we are doing in this conversation right now, intellectual discussion where we share our ideas and thoughts with other educators who are listening to us. You see, I know we don't have much time, but I would totally like to have over 5 hours of this discussion because it's a hot topic. It's I can't sleep. That's how hot it is. But looking ahead, think about it. What is like the future of this new fabric that you must interact with every day? There is no other way. If you don't interact with this new AI fabric, you will just be left behind. I have this example that this astrophysicist Michio Kaku has said. He said that imagine it's not 2024, but it is T minus 10,000, long time ago, 10,000 years. It's the first time some early man has just figured out, oh my goodness, this rock that I used to just kill animals for my survival now can be attached to a wooden stick and then can be turned into a hammer. What is that? And then he shows it to his peers. Some peers say, ah, I like it. Let's use it. While some others say, no, 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 no. Let me stick with the traditional way. So the idea is essentially that people who have access to this tool basically have become more nourishes because they are able to effectively, without much harm, to their own hands, are able to use this tool to propagate and develop, and their trajectory has been established. I think in that same example, if we were able to apply that analogy to this current, not even infancy, it's more embryonic. I think it's so much more. Infancy is only AGI, I think. I think
Yeah.
it's going to go way beyond our wildest imaginations. But at this current stage, what do you think is like the next decade going to be like, where you open up a computer? Do we even have websites? It's all chats everywhere. What do you think it's going to be like?
Yeah, I I think so. Kind of what you're talking about, and even right now, right? You can chat on on the computer, and you don't know if it's a human or not, right? And it's only going to get more and more impressive there, as the years go on. I think we talked about a lot of like concerns. I think we just have to address those concerns, and it comes down to, I think what you described is evolution, right? And but we have to do it in an equitable way, right? We can't just leave people behind. We have to. This is. I think it's going to become. So right now we're talking like this is like a classroom, maybe institution policy, or guiding. We got to have a much larger, I think, discussion. And Congress and stuff, I think, are, at least what I've seen, sometimes they're kind of thinking about this, and I think some other nations are well ahead of us when it comes to that. But because what you described to me, and I think you're right, um, it's more than just this little additional tool. It's more than that melon baller, right? It's something that's going to affect everything. And we don't. I just don't think we have um, the consensus. Maybe that's not the right word, but we're thinking of this larger picture. I wish I could forecast what it's going to look like. I do kind of think that as we progress and where we're at now, it's going to get like we see it in the beginning, like it was a super tool, right? And every article you looked out there talked about either this is the doom to education, or this is the greatest thing ever. That kind of hype went down, and actually, if I remember right, I think some usage of it dropped. I also think there's a misinterpretation of like really how much it's being used. I think that gets overblown sometimes. But I could see like maybe a little bit of rejection of this technology in the short term future. For a lot of things like we talked about, just these kind of unknowns, and how it's being used. Some people just might have a phobia of that change. It's so drastic, and they're just not going to. And there might be some pushback there. I just think we have to be careful, and it has to be calculated, critical thought solutions and how this is applied, because a blanket solution is not going to work. It's only going to create seams and other problems further on. We have to have a true like that. It gets kind of frustrating, right? You ask me a question, I'm like, well, it depends. You're like, well, I wanted an answer, right? I wanted an answer. Like, well, no, it depends, because we got to talk about all the context, right? Because that influences how the solution is implemented, and how effective it'll be. So, I think that's the same way. But I also think we have to be doing the prep work now. And what I mean by prep work is, how well do our K through 12 students, how sharp is their skill on AI literacy? How sharp is their skill on information literacy? Right? That, if we start laying that framework now, we're going to prepare them for that future that you're talking about. So I think that's where we have to, again, less focus maybe on those hard skills and more focus on those critical thinking, metacognition skills. And again, we have to think about this too. Like, I'm not going to start that maybe in the first grade, right? It doesn't make sense. They don't have the ability or the for metacognition at that point. But we have to start integrating that later on when they're able to. So that's where I think we got to put the effort in now, because this technology, again, it's going to outpace us, and we're going to find ourselves 3 or 4 or 5 years down the road, and our society is not going to have the skills that it needs to use that technology.
Right.
And does that become a national security issue? Right.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know.
Right. I started to cut you off there, but it reminds me of that example you gave of the map. It's too you realized it too lately that a completely new way of navigating through GPS has completely wiped off this map-based, paper-based navigation. It's really rare. If you want to see a map, you have to go to like a park, and it's only a map of a park. That's it. It's not a state anymore. But nobody sells that, and it's exactly. I think we can apply that to this also.
It comes down to prioritizing those skills. What do we think as a society is important, and not taking a short term look on it, but looking at the long term, just like you described. Are we looking at that next 50 years? Right, where are we going to be in 50 years, and what skills? It's in the military. There's a saying that we're always fighting the last war, because we didn't prepare what the future warfare is going to look like. Now, we've gotten better at it, but that in the past, that was kind of seen as like a tenet, right? Because we didn't prepare when we should have for and there's like kind of a Americans, we kind of take pride in in this, but not in this, but pride in our military, and so on. But we generally lose the first battle of every war. If you think about it, we do. World War II, it was Operation Torch. We didn't do so well in the beginning, but we learned from it, and we adapted, and we changed. But because we had to relearn, we had to learn some new skills and how to apply it, right? But imagine if we would have done that before. Right, that takes some foresight, and trying to project that. Right. Not an easy task. It's easy to say, right? It's easy to say, but it's not. It's hard to implement, especially across the nation, right? I mean, that's a difficult challenge.
That's true. I think embracing what you see around you, and then adapting, uh, and then taking action, is also If I can sum it up like that.
Yeah, developing your own reflection skills, right? And being able to, again, reflection is part of metacognition, right? Understanding my own thinking, understanding and identifying my own bias and why I may be thinking that, or why I believe that, and doing that matters. And I just don't think a lot of times we don't give ourselves the time enough to do that type of reflection, to better understand our own self-awareness.
I agree. Yeah, that's really true. I work with many of these uh, university professors here, just interacting with them. I really I agree with you in the sense that it's more of a product they are just trying to get out of the student, but they don't necessarily ask for the students' reflection and if they have learned something, what is the path, what is journey the students has taken. They don't want to talk about all that. End of the semester, grade, and that's it.
It's because we've taken our education system, we made it very industrialized, right? We get the same input, we put it through a process, we get this output, and this doesn't work. It's it's efficient, right?
Mhm.
But it doesn't work when it comes to humans and
Right.
learning. Learning is such a complex process. We don't really even fully understand it, right? And and so to put it down to here, read this, do this, and now I'm going to stamp off and say that you have this skill. That's too simplistic, right? And there has to be, there's, and I say it again, this is a difficult challenge because of resources. Uh,
Mhm.
you know, I can do it pretty efficiently in industrial model because I can have 100 students in my lecture hall, right? But how effective am I achieving those learning outcomes? Probably not as effective if I was in a class of 10 and I was taking a very experiential approach, because it's very hard to do an experiential approach with 100 students,
Right.
unless you got like 50 TAs, right?
Right.
So that's what I mean. It's a difficult challenge to tackle, and this is where this technology can help us. But we just have to be careful in how it's balanced.
That's true. I agree. Yes. Dr. Wood, thank you so much for joining us today. Your expertise and insights have given us a much clearer picture of how this Gen AI is shaping education in general and also shaping curriculum design, instructional design, and the much broader educational landscape. To our listeners, we hope today's discussion has inspired you to explore the possibilities of AI while remaining thoughtful about its ethical and responsible implications. Dr. Wood, would you like to chip in your socials or any LinkedIn profiles or your websites or anything like that for our
So
audience so they can connect with you?
yeah, one of the things I'm not very good at is that kind of social presence. But I am on LinkedIn. Please look me up, connect with me. I'd love to have conversations about, education in general, even if it's not Gen AI. And if you're interested in instructional design, I would encourage you to look at National University as an option. One of the things I really like there is they are truly oriented toward the adult learner. Um, most courses we teach are 4 weeks. So you can get a 3 semester hour course done. It can be a heavy lift at times, but it's very manageable, and the instructional design is oriented towards that learner. Um, but yeah, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. And I think you summed up in that last statement you did. I think you summed it up very well, the conversation. So thank you. And if I can, I'm going to use that in the future.
Of course, you're welcome. You're totally welcome to use it. And again, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to the Culture Compute podcast and share it with your colleagues. We will be back next week with more conversations at the intersection of culture, technology, and education. Until then, keep computing culture.